Welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Each week I'll be interviewing another person from the trans and non-binary community, sharing a little bit more of my story, interviewing them for their story, and allowing you to ask questions throughout the process. My guest tonight is Celia Sandhya Daniels. Celia is an Asian Indian trans woman of color who is an entrepreneur, public speaker, activist, musician, photographer, and a filmmaker. She writes and speaks passionately about her struggles and the challenges she faced in her family, work, and community, both in the U.S. and in India. As a management consultant with top Fortune 100 companies, she educates, empowers, and advocates for transgender and non-binary individuals in the corporate world. Celia brings an amazing intersectional blend of ethnicity, creativity, culture, religion, and corporate experience to her activism. Welcome, Celia. Do we have your audio back up? So, I went through your intro, Celia. So, what are your preferred pronouns?
My preferred pronouns are she, her.
Okay. And how do you describe the way you identify?
I identify as a gender fluid and non-op trans. That's the way I identify myself.
All right. So I know that you've done a lot of interviews and stuff, and we'll definitely get into it. Let's just start with, when did you first realize you were different, and how did that affect your childhood? And feel free to expand on however your childhood was.
Yeah, of course. So I knew I was born in India. I'm a South Asian. I was 4 years old. When I was 4 years old, my mom found me very strange because I was covering my head with my mom's sari and I was pretending to be a girl. My mom found that very interesting and she kept asking me, why are you covering your head? And I said, I'm a girl. And that's the way I started realizing that, she thought I was just playing. But as I was growing older and older, when I was around 7 years old, I remember my mom telling me that you should not dress up anymore because you're a boy. And I realized that this was something wrong. Only then I knew it was wrong. So that's the time I actually realized that there was something different about me. I liked being a girl. And so that was where, I would say probably 4 years old.
Okay. So yeah, you realized first that you were a girl, and then it wasn't until society, your parents obviously, started to kind of try and push you in the other direction that you're like, wait, this is not right.
Right, yeah.
So when did you first realize or identify as non-binary or yeah, you said you don't define yourself as trans, right? You said just non-binary?
I'm a gender non-binary. I would say non-op trans.
Non-op trans. Okay. So you do consider yourself trans, non-op.
Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when did you first come to the realization that that was the proper way to identify you?
So I think it took a while, especially when you're, I was born in the early 60s, early 70s. And when I first came out and I started, realizing that I was different, most of the time after I went to college and people started identifying in two spectrums, either you're a cross-dresser or you're a transsexual. Mm-hmm. So I was at a point where I didn't fit in both of those genders. It was really hard for me either not genders, I would say blocks of spectrum where people thought, it's either you're a cross-dresser or transgender or a transsexual.
Slices of the wider spectrum. They've got the narrow slices that they understand and define, and then there's so much more in between, right?
That's where I identified as I didn't identify as a cross-dresser because it wasn't a dressing issue. And I didn't identify as a transsexual because it wasn't about my sexuality. It was more about my gender and it was in my head. Mm-hmm. So I think that was what I was trying to discover. And it took a while. And probably in 2011, I went to a lot of conferences. I started studying about who am I? And that's when I really realized that I didn't hate my male gender. I liked that male gender of mine, and I also loved more the female gender of mine. So that's why I identify as gender fluid more, and I express more as a trans feminine woman, because this is more of the shame that I always hid in my life, and I was so happy to I found that I can still live in both genders.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I feel like there's so many trans people. I mean, just so many of us in society feel like it's so important to define ourselves, and
Yeah.
we have that definition thrust on us, most of us, and breaking free from that is hard as the first step. But then beyond that, like, what is my new definition? And then, in order to understand ourselves and define ourselves, we feel like we have to find what that specific term is and nail ourselves down to it. And instead of like understanding more of the fluidity and how it's a spectrum, but also how it changes throughout our lives. And sometimes you might identify completely as trans, sometimes you're not. Maybe it's more gender fluid, more non-binary. But I think we're too quick to try and define those for ourselves. One of the reasons is we have to know that in order to describe ourselves to people. People see that there's something going on with us, and they ask us all these questions. And so, it's important for us to have the definition. But I think that just makes it more of a struggle, right?
It is, especially when you try to identify and help them understand that gender fluidity is where you identify in a binary, actually. So you're either Daniels or you're Celia, and that's how I identify myself. But most of all, I love to identify as Celia a lot because that is what is important to me. And I don't believe that I wanted to change my gender. I didn't want to do the gender reassignment surgery because I believe that it's important for me to, respect the gender that I was born and also, live in the gender that I prefer. So it's both my birth gender and my preferred gender. I'm able to express in both as Daniels and Celia.
Nice. Do you consider yourself religious or spiritual?
I do. I consider myself I'm a Christian through my parents. My father was a Hindu and he became a Christian while he was 15 years old. So my entire family, we all became Christians, and I grew up in a Christian household. So for me, relationship with God was very important than religion I would say I'm spiritual, but that relationship with God was so important to me than the religious part of it. I can explain later in the conversation why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seemed that your ability to find that balance between loving and accepting the gender that you were born in, and loving and accepting the gender that you feel you truly are, and allowing them to coexist. It seems like kind of an old world, almost like some kind of Buddhist philosophy or something along those lines. That's why I started to assume that was it. I'm surprised that your religious background is Christian, because Christianity is again very defined.
I know there's so much going on in Christianity right now. It's a lot of mess, especially the evangelical community. But I think I found my niche because it was through my struggles and pain that I found there was a God who was listening to me. I spent a lot of my time, my spirituality on the beaches, to sit on the beach and cry my heart out. Because I didn't know, I didn't have any therapy at the time. I didn't have any doctors. I didn't want to talk to my parents because they would just say, hey, something is wrong. You need to get yourself fixed. So when you're living in India, you're living in a situation where the society itself is very ostracized, and you may not be able to come out and say, I'm a boy and I like to be a girl. That's not going to work, and especially in the Christian community. It was a big no back in India as well.
So, did you transition in India before you came over to the United States?
I would say my life. I would say I probably wanted to explore what was going on. I didn't understand what was going on for a very long time because I remember I always lived in denial. I would say. While I was dreaming to be a girl, I thought that I could get away with this. I didn't want this. I hated it because it kind of And there were times when I was a child and I had gone out the first time, and that's probably my first coming out experience. And it didn't go out very well, and I was caught by some construction workers, and I was in my ninth grade, and they started making fun of me. Not just making fun of me, but they actually called a lot of derogatory words in the native language.
Mm-hmm.
And almost nine people were standing around me and making fun of me, and they were pointing fingers at me, saying that this person is a Hijra boy. And that was such an insulting thing to me because I did not expect, men to, or I would say grown-up people to discriminate a child,
Mm-hmm.
9-year-old child, and I was standing in a skirt and just I didn't know what to do. And one thing that hit me was, why do they hate me so much? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just dressed like a girl. Why did they hate me so much? And that was the end of my coming out in India.
Okay.
And I came back home and I started crying and I wanted to kill myself. I was afraid to die and I was afraid to live because it was a very difficult situation where I didn't know what to do. I was just stuck between the devil and the deep sea kind of situation.
Yeah. So from that point on, you kind of the term the general term is you went closeted, right? You kind of put it away
I
and tried to
was.
avoid it.
Yeah. I didn't want to come out because it was really hard for me to come out. And also, the society doesn't accept, when you're living in India, it's more a patriarchal community.
Mm.
Being a boy is very privileged. Being a man is privileged. And for me to come out as a girl is not a privilege. It's like, why would you do that? It's crazy. So I was at this time where I did not know what to do with my life, and I was always struggling. So there was always a closet in my college. There was always a closet in my workspace. I mean, when I was working back in India, I always lived in the shadows. I always came out in the dark, and I did not want to come out in India. And it was so difficult for me to not be able to express. And my dream was to just live my life as a girl. At least give me a few minutes. I just want to live those few minutes as a girl. And I was literally struggling for this few minutes and few seconds as a girl. And I remember times when I used to just slip on a skirt and sit for a while till my mom comes. She'd say, I'm coming in 25 minutes. And 25 minutes was like huge time for me. I loved those 25 minutes. I know we have all been through that. And that's the
Yeah.
way I lived.
Yeah.
But it was really hard.
Yeah.
It
I
was really
definitely remember
hard.
those times when it before came out. Well, before I even had it,
Mm,
I was able to identify or understand what was going
mm,
on. Those stolen moments of being able to dress in a skirt or something like that, and it felt so wonderful and yet so horrible at the same time. You felt like I was married at the time. I felt like I was cheating or doing something horribly wrong, was ruining my marriage, all of these things. And yet that feeling that I got from being able to do that, to express that part of me, was so incredibly
amazing.
euphoric. It was amazing. It was impossible to avoid. Little tangent. That was
Yeah.
one of the things that I first started to realize that maybe I was okay as this. Because we have all this these negative voices in our head and in society. The first story that I read that helped me was people on a forum were talking about the purge and how much it cost them.
Oh,
So what
yeah.
they'd all done is they'd gone through and they'd thrown away all their clothes. They donated it all away. They had families and kids, and they couldn't afford to lose them. So they were putting their foot down on themselves, and they were not going to do this anymore. They were done with it. And 6 months, a year, 2 years later, they'd have to buy it all back because it was just a part of them. And this was the amount of money it cost them. And that made me realize, okay, if these people have this so much to lose, then it's going to be part of me, and it's something that I have to deal with. And that then I got over that kind of, you know you used this term in an interview before, like that fetishized kind of version where it's so powerful to you in those few moments because you just allow yourself to be that, and it kind of goes away a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you find that India's much harder to come out than in the United States? It's been much easier here, and you've found group and community.
I would say that it is hard for me. It was hard for me to come out in India, and especially in early 70s and 80s. India was not developed at all. And the interesting part about India is the Hijra community, which is 4,000-year-old culture, was accepted more. But unfortunately, I didn't identify with the Hijra community because it was very religious and they were performers and sex workers, mostly living in the temple and trying to cater to some of the clients that way. So my life was not like that. I went to college, I studied well, I've got a degree in computer science, my master's degree in computer science, and I wanted to live my life as a woman, as a professional, but it was really hard to come out in India because people will never give you a job and you cannot even walk in the street and they always identify you as the Hijra community. So even if I'm learned and even if I have a PhD, if I walk in the streets like this today, people will immediately say you're a Hijra and they'll start discriminating me. And that's how it was those days. I found it really hard to come out, and I came out in this country. I have to be really thankful. But I have my own stories coming out in different parts of the states that I lived in. And some of them are really, really like North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Pennsylvania, all the blue states. It was really hard for me to say that it was really coming out. Though I came out, I was scared of my life too, because many times people call me names and they were confused seeing me on this, in a Macy's. I would go to Macy's and they would like, that is not a woman, that's a man, but why are you different? That's the way they looked at me. And it was really hard for me, but I kept going. I can tell you that. I just kept going. I'm like, I don't care. I'm here to know who I am and I'm just going to keep doing. And that's how it was.
Do you think that, do you find that the way you're accepted by people has changed more because just time has passed more, or because your confidence has changed and increased?
I think it is, you're right. It's the confidence also. I was less confident when I first came out and I went to Trias. We all know the Trias groups. So I went for the Colorado Trias and I was there. That was very, that was one of my first step where I felt a little more confident coming out. And it was good, I liked it. And slowly then I started coming out on my own. That was the way I started doing it. The confidence level started increasing the more and more I started going out. And I don't think the confidence level would have come out, just because I'm going out with friends, but I wanted to go out and I went out alone many times because I didn't have friends, but I felt like, okay, I'm going to pass. So I was more focusing on passing. Passing was like a big thing at the time. I want to pass, and I want to pass like this woman. I want to pass like a woman. I want to talk like a woman. I was done with all that, later in my life. But that was a phase where we all went through passing, and it was important at the time. It kind of gave me a confidence level, or I would say it was kind of pushing me to the edge to dress nicely and to present myself nicely. So it was helpful. So confidence level, of course. And also the education, the media, everything started changing after a while. And people started focusing more and more people started coming out. Though they have come out, I don't think it was publicized anywhere. People came out, but none of them knew that they were all learned. They were working in corporate industries. They were trying to come out, but they're still in the closet. So we didn't hear about all the stories. I think now it's all about stories. People are coming out. We're having this talk show. We're having this show basically because we want people to hear our voices. We want them to know that people like us exist and we are normal like anyone else. And, we need to be accepted. These stories, the media, I would say, confidence level, I would say, and pushing ourselves to be out there also really helped me.
Yeah, and that's kind of one thing that I found, and one of the key messages that I want to have for people, for other trans people that are trying to come out, trying to figure out how to do it, is it's important to do, like you said, to push yourself, to dress better and try and pass. Yeah, that's kind of a rite of passage, for lack of something else without the pun. But the confidence is key, and just going out and being yourself and doing it, but allowing yourself the flexibility. Again, allow it to be kind of a spectrum thing, and allow it to be flexible, where this week you feel confident to put on a dress and go out, and next week maybe you don't. Maybe like some tight fitting pants is kind of the best you can do, and you're too afraid to go beyond that, and that's totally fine, because maybe the dress isn't your thing, or maybe just this week you can't handle it. It's a little too much pressure to go and try and do that, because you don't feel like you can pass. I still have it where it's getting better, but there are some days when I look in the mirror and I don't see Emily. I see a man. And that's an incredibly dysphoric moment for me, and it kind of sends that panic. But luckily, most of the time, I do see Emily, and I think it's gotten better over the last couple of years. But just like I said, just allowing yourself to kind of like ebb and flow with it.
Yeah, and I wanted to also add to it is that's how we start, right? Passing is very important at the time. But now I've started focusing on presenting myself. So I don't hide. I don't want to pass as a woman anymore. I want to present myself as a trans woman now.
Mm-hmm.
So I voluntarily go to, when I go to grocery store, when I get a chance, someone, I say, hey, I'm Celia, and I happen, they know that I'm trans. And when they ask me, they'll say, hey, so how's your day? I'll say, oh, yeah, I had a good meeting today. I had some, a trans conference. And then I start talking to them about, and that gave me more confidence too. So passing was that's how I started.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of took a low priority. And then presenting myself, presenting my gender, presenting my the way I am in a nice way, in a much dignified way, was more important to me than just passing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want I don't want to pass like a woman. And what are you going to do? I want to present myself, and that is where the story comes out. And they look at me and say, "Oh, you look very dignified. You look nice. I love your skirt." And for me, that is more important. And then I start telling my story. I say I'm a trans woman, and I've done that in Costco. I've done it in Best Buy. I've done it in every places that I've gone to. I've started presenting, and I've written an article about passing versus presenting. So yeah, I just wanted to lay it out there before we get into the other topic. But my focus is not passing anymore; it's about presenting myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I this is a little tangential to that, but I'm finding that confidence to be yourself. That you're not presenting as a woman; you're presenting as yourself. That is the key. My therapist at one point said, "Well, why don't you put on a dress and go out unshaven without makeup on?" And I basically looked at her sideways and just kind of laughed to myself, like there's no way that will ever happen. There's no chance, because it's too incongruent, And so it's taken me a long time to be able to get to that point of like, no, I'm presenting as me. Today, I didn't feel like putting makeup on, which means, I probably didn't shave either, so I got a little bit of stubble, and that's me. Plenty of women go out without putting makeup on, and it's fine. So yeah, trying to get to that point of presenting as you, not presenting as the gender you're trying to identify with. It's very key.
Right.
And then I think, again, with that comes the confidence, and then when you are put together and you are presenting well, like you said, professionally and with dignity, and with the confidence, I think we come a lot closer to passing than we intend to at that point. Even I've got a message here from one of the viewers that was saying, the problem with transitioning is we rely on acceptance, but with the years I found out that to demand respect instead of looking for approval. And
exactly. Yeah.
That's perfect. All right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So one of the key things about you and your story is that you are married, and that these times transitioning in the States and coming out is also in the context of being married, correct?
Of course, yeah.
And so how did that affect things?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
Sorry, we were talking on each other. How did being married affect your transition, do you feel? And your ability to come out?
It was difficult because, I had an arranged marriage in India. And I wanted to tell my wife, my future wife at the time, about me. And I told her that um, we were just having a discussion. I didn't want to tell her because even at that time, you won't believe it. I thought this will go away. If I get married, maybe my wife will take away my femininity and I'll be okay. Because I was still in denial when I got married. It was funny. But I truly believe that, oh, it's going to go away, because I'm going to be living with a woman now. And so my fantasies are going to go to her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's the weird thing. But trust me, it was really hard. 1 year of our marriage was fine. And then the second year of our marriage was so hard because his feelings started coming back. And it kind of kept telling me that, oh, I could hear that white noise again, that you are a woman, you need to put on a dress. And I couldn't do anything about it. And I started hiding myself. And, I did a lot of business travel and I was managing lots of businesses and millions of dollars. Even in my business life, I was not willing to come out because I had a good job with great respect. And at the same time, I was struggling, as a person, I was struggling deep inside. And I was not being, I was struggling with my gender dysphoria. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I came out to my wife, and this was in 2004 in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay.
The reason why I'm saying Jacksonville, Florida, because there's an interesting story to it. When I came out to her, the first thing I told her was this: "Sweetheart, I dress like a woman, and I don't know." And she said, "Oh, you dress like a woman, it's fetish. You can get over it. You'll be fine. Go get some therapy, get some help." And I was like, oh my God, what did I say? Actually, it is not dressing. And I was trying to explain to her, it didn't work. So I thought maybe if I go and talk to a therapist, I might be able to get over. Because I had a child at the time. I was having a little baby and I was married. It was 4 years into our marriage and I was doing well work-wise. And I wanted to have I wanted to have a life of a cisgender man. I didn't want to be trans. It was really, really hard for me. And at the time, I remember talking to a gay counselor in Florida. The gay counselor talked to me and on the phone, because at the time there was nobody you could talk to in person. You didn't find too many counselors who knew what is transgender.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to him, and he told me that you are a feminine gay. And I told him, excuse me, I'm not interested in men. I like women. I want to be a woman, but I'm not interested in men. He said, no, a lot of gay folks live in denial, and you're one of them. So that was so upsetting to me because I kind of felt like he didn't understand really what I was going through.
No.
He just dismissed me after 2 hours of conversation. And that, in fact, put me into a lot more thought process as to. And then I met another trans doctor in Arizona, and she looked at me and she said, Celia, are you happy? And I said, yeah, I'm happy. And she said, if you transition, you'll be more happy. And I looked at myself and I thought, who are these people telling me what to do? This is my life. When I transition, if I have a problem, you're not going to be there. And I need to decide on my own. I am a biologist. I worked on human genome projects. If I don't understand what is wrong with my chromosomes or what is wrong with my physiology, my anatomy, my biology, no one else will. So I started studying all these articles. I started studying a lot of these articles about why trans people behave that way. What's going on in their MRI? John Hopkins. I took Stanford articles, and these are research articles, not just some Google stuff. Mm-hmm. I started reading more and more. I read. I understood a lot more at the time that we express as we dress in another, in a cross out. We cross-dress. At the time, I thought I was a cross-dresser, right? So I didn't know that the reason I was wearing a woman's clothing is because there is something in me that is telling me that I'm a woman. It is not because I felt good about wearing a dress, but I felt good about expressing that gender. That is what was important to me. And once I understood that part of it, it was amazing. Mm-hmm. So it took a while. It took a lot of toll. And I was trying to discover myself. And I kept on telling my wife that, hey, sweetheart, I think I know who I am. I think I know what I am. And then she asked me, so what's going to happen to you? Are you, she was worried that she didn't know what to talk about. She didn't want to talk to me about my gender identity because it was making her uncomfortable. And she is a cisgender woman. My daughter's cisgender at the time too. And I was really, really struggling at the time. I didn't know how to lead my family life. And I loved my wife so much. I still do. Um, at the time, I kept telling her that, sweetheart, I'm going through some problems. I don't know how to tell you, but it's not dressing, it's something beyond that. And by the time I was in California, I thank California for that because I had so many friends, I could talk to people. And then I understood that I didn't hate my male anatomy, my birth gender, but I liked my preferred gender a lot more than my birth gender.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of trans folks were telling me at the time that you need to transition, but I did not want to because I still liked that part because that connected me with my wife and my daughter. And my daughter, I came out to her when she was 15 years old, and she said, "Dad, are you going to be? Am I going to call you mom, or what's going to happen?" And I looked at her face and I saw that she's going to miss her dad. It was so heartbreaking to me. And I said, "Sweetheart, no matter what happens, I'm going to be a dad. It's not going to, nothing's going to change. I don't care about these pronouns. I'm going to be a father, your dad." And I told my wife, "Sweetheart, I'm still your husband, not going to change." So that gave her more confidence. And in my
Mm-hmm.
journey, I would say in my transition, it's more of a family transition that I had. I've not had medical transition. I've not even taken HRT, hormones, nothing. I've never done that in my life. But it's just my preference. It's not that I don't support people who do that. I counsel a lot of people and I tell them that, do what is right for you. But as you asked rightly, in my transition, my wife was not accepting. My daughter accepted me in 25 minutes. My wife took 17 years to understand me.
Hmm.
And I tell her today proudly that, "Sweetheart, I'm going to be Celia today." And she'd be like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." Because she knows and she trusts me now so much. So that is what is important to me. And it's
That's
not about
amazing.
me all the time, but my family is important. And I've been married for 23 years and we are still married. We still live in the same house. And I go back and I can even talk to my wife about this this interview. I can tell her that what happened today, and that is the most important thing. It's such a great relief that you can do that. And to me, that is more. It's a paramount. It's huge than the other things that I worry about in my life.
That's so amazing. Yeah, I wasn't able to do that with my marriage. I think the key that you struck, that the thing that you found there is that trust. When you come out to somebody close to you in your family, especially somebody that relies on you so much for so
Mm-hmm.
much, personally. She needed her husband. She needed that rock there in her life still, and she was afraid of losing that. So being able to express that trust and confidence in her and just say, you're not going to lose that. That'll still be there, but this will be a part of it too. That's pretty amazing, and that's very key. Like I said, I wasn't able to strike that in my marriage, again because I wasn't able to define it. It it came together for me at a point where it was I was still so confused, and it took years after the marriage before I was able to put it all together. I had a similar experience that you did, but with a girlfriend after my marriage, where I was dating her, and I figured the same thing. I'm with a girl, and so I can live vicariously through her. I can buy her pretty things, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff. And then it just kind of kept coming back of like, I just really want to paint my nails. There are so many parts of the expression of it that I really felt I needed to do. And if you can't find that balance, if you can't instill the trust in your partner that things aren't going to change so drastically for them,
Yeah.
and if you can't, on the other side, if you can't allow yourself to express those things if you feel locked in, then you just kind of resent the other person, and I think that's why a lot of relationships break down when faced with this, because it's so hard. So some people find it hard to do that, to say, no, you're not losing anything. We're gaining.
I know. I think I'm more thankful to my wife for accepting me. That was really hard for her. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm blessed. I feel so blessed for having a woman like that in my life. Unfortunately, not more. Many of us have that privilege. We
Yeah.
sometimes don't get to have that. I really feel for you.
So
But
what
I'm
kind?
glad, it
Oh,
worked out.
that's
Sorry.
sorry. Uh, so what kind of work do you do as an advocate for trans and non-binary people?
So in my profession, I am a management consultant. I've been a consultant for Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 and top five. I've worked with all these consulting firms, IT firms. I work with clinical research, managed millions of dollars across the globe. I've done outsourcing and developed a lot more in the business world. I was very successful in my business world. Um, and at a point, I felt like I need to do something more. And I remember there was a turning point in my life. I remember going to a Transgender Day of Remembrance, and I stood in the end of the hall and I was crying because I felt like people like me, person of color, could get killed in this country because the people hate you. And that was a big wake up call for me. And I thought, I don't want to I don't want to die in my life just working for a corporate company. I don't want to be a CEO of a company that's earning money. I want to do something for people like me. And how do I do it? Where do I start? I started coming out in my company. I started coming out as gender fluid, which is very interesting. So I went to the LGBTQ group and I sat with them and I said, hey, I'm gender fluid. And I was in a suit when I was talking to them. And they looked at me and said, can we see in a sari tomorrow, Celia? They called me Daniels at the time.
Mm.
Can we see in a sari, Daniel? I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. This is not Halloween. It doesn't work that way. But when I feel like, I want to come out and I want you to know that this is how people are. There are a lot of people like me who are gender non-binary. They want to identify in a gender neutral way. They want to identify as a man, or sometimes they want to be in their birth gender, preferred gender. And almost 27% of the youth in California are coming out this way. And, the companies have to be ready. And so when I started doing that, I started becoming an advocate in my own company. And I found that, after a while, I found these companies just have a pink washing going on. It's like, oh, yeah, we love you and all that stuff. But honestly, they don't change their policies. So I started going out and I started learning about policies. What is it that we need to do to change this? And I took some of my business ideas and I gave it to Trans Latino Coalition. I worked with Trans Can Work, worked with different organizations. I even went to the Democratic Club and I came out in a Democratic Club and I told them that, hey, I want to do something. I want you to be my ally. And how do you do it? How I can educate you. And this is how I can do it. So I started taking my business ideas and I started putting a structure to it. And I said, if I'm a trans person, what are the change that we can do around me? So here's where, the school board is important, the college is important, the workplace is important, healthcare is important, immigration policies, incarceration. If you're looking at housing, and I started going into every detail and I put a big plan for them. And California Endowment was like super thrilled when they saw my idea. They said, hey, can we borrow your idea?
Hmm.
Sure. So it was very organic. I started all my business ideas when I started looking at the nonprofit. I started giving them ideas, and they've never had people like me come and talk to them. And I also took these ideas to India, and I was starting to work with companies in India. For instance, I'm having an office here, and how IBM in India has worked. And when I was working in the diversity and inclusion part of the groups, I found it's very different in India because it's casteism. It's not about culture, it's not about race, it's casteism also. It plays a role. So I organically fell into it and I started working with a lot of organizations and then I started support here and we call it Fluid. A support group where you had gender non-binary, you have all kinds of people coming to this groups, and it was predominantly lesbian and gay. And we changed the PFAC format, we renamed PFAC as Fluid. And we did that in Simi Valley here. And then I also started working with Indivisible Kaneho, These are the organizations that I work, and it's an organization that fights for civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at gun lobbying, what is the gun violence that happens, and how can I stand for them? One thing that I found in all my activism is when you fight for a cause, you kind of find intersectionalities in that cause. It's not about you all the time, but you stand hand in hand, like Black Lives Matters. And I started studying about Black Lives Matters, and I started wanted to be there for my friends who are Black and also trans community who are Black. So I found a lot of intersectionalities there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start working with one nonprofit, believe it or not, it just connected with all nonprofits. Like homelessness was a big deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So homelessness along California, LA is huge. And now I started looking at homelessness for LGBTQ folks. And within the LGBTQ folks, I started focusing on homelessness for the transgender community. So it was very interesting working with Pacifica, lots of other Casa Pacifica, LA LGBTQ Center. So it just spontaneously, just started coming out. And I was like, I then realized that what am I doing? I'm not doing my work. I quit my job and I started my own company. And now I start doing freelancing so that I'll have more time on my activism as well. Fortunately, my wife is working, and I'm in a position in my life where I have, I'm kind of settled in my life. And I thought, if I want to do something the rest of my life, this is what I want to do. I told my wife the same thing, sweetheart. If I start a nonprofit, it will be to help nonprofit and connect nonprofits together, especially for transgender community.
Mm-hmm.
Focusing only on transgender community, both in US and in India. So that is how I started getting into the whole thing.
I love that. I love how the story starts with you being an advocate for yourself, and then it kind of chains into that, and then it sort of seems like the Matrix, right, where you see all these different individual groups, but you see how they all interconnect, and they have the trans thread throughout, and how you can help people through all of these different areas. That's pretty wonderful. How has being active in transgender rights and those different areas with those different charities, how has that helped you with your confidence and feeling valid as a as a non-binary person?
I think the validity first comes when we first accept ourselves. I didn't accept myself for a very long time. And I remember in 2001, I was in Vegas. I had gone for a business trip. And I was sitting in my hotel room, and crying because I wore this dress and I went out across the strip. I came back to my room and I started crying. I know everybody in this call, we have been through that situation. We have gone out and come back to our hotel rooms. And I started crying that night because I didn't find joy in that. I was like, what am I doing? And I found that I did not accept myself at the time. I didn't want to accept myself as trans at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to just dress up and just be happy with it. But then I found out that once I literally started praying. You won't believe it. As a Christian, for me, I find a lot of peace in prayer and meditation. So I prayed and I said, God, if you made me like this, you deal with it. Why am I worried about it? I'm not going to deal with it. Because your Bible says in Psalms that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. If you made me as this way, you figure it out. And I started praying that way, and I started accepting myself. That was a huge validity. Mm-hmm. And I started finding more confidence in it because I didn't want anybody to validate me. I didn't want anyone to say that, oh, you're trans or you're that or this. But I found that peace within myself first. And once that happened, it kind of gave me a boost, like 50% to 60% of boost. And then I had these trans organizations, and that's what was the beginning for me to kind of give me that validity. And I felt good about myself. So I didn't focus on myself. Then after that, I started focusing on people like me. I started from inside, and then I started, so it was from inside out, and then from outside in, people helping me when I help them. Mm-hmm. So when I see a trans person trying to get a job, and I try to help the person get a job, in fact, it's like a self-care for me. It kind of healed me a lot. I felt that healing and saw the joy in that person's face just by listening to that person on a phone in India. This person said, I did not have anybody listening to me for the past 30 years. You took the phone and you're listening to me. And for me, I was thinking, the least I can do is to listen to somebody who's struggling. And why don't I do that? And I started doing now. But at the time, those are the things that kind of help me to feel good about myself. And I know we all can do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not about us. And while we're doing it, if we can help another person and just follow along, even my makeup, I have done a lot of makeup sessions with my friends. They ask me, how do you do makeup? And I'll be like, my focus is not that, but if it really helps you and if it helps us connect, I'm going to teach you that. So, I've done all kinds of stuff, but I just love, just to help people. And that's how my parents were. And I think it just comes from my parents too.
Yeah, no, it's a good set of values that they instilled. But
I know.
yeah, I just love how it's so helpful. It's reciprocal. Us helping other people and how they help us. That's wonderful. So in your work with other trans people and trying to help them, what are some of the common themes that you have heard from them? What are some of the common thoughts and fears or struggles and issues that we seem to all run into?
I think if I take the issues currently, the youngsters are more worried about the future. Especially the young trans folks are really worried about the future because they find a lot of oppression, bullying, and cyberbullying. Lots of things happening, murders happening. We already had 14 murders in US now, person of color, just in 2020. In 2019, there were almost 30 trans folks who were killed. So the youngsters are all trying to come out, and they find that people like us, if we cannot give them that confidence and faith and that hope, they're kind of worried about a lot of these things. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work a lot with the youth, trans youth, and help them. The second thing that I'm also doing is building allies, trying to build allies within our community where people are supportive to us. The third thing I'm doing is, since I'm a Christian, I'm trying to educate the evangelical Christian community, which is the most difficult community because they have this bias. I know we all can relate to it, right? Because my wife told me, I'm in a church board. As Daniel, I'm in a church board. And I was the only person who stood up for LGBTQ community out of the 7 people. I was the only person. And I told my wife, it's kind of getting a toll on my head and I'm going to resign. I don't want to be in this board. And my wife stood by me and she said, you have been through this, and if you don't speak up, these morons, these people will take advantage of every person like you, and you have to speak up. And I stood in the board meeting and I spoke about people like me. I said, you know what, I'm a big advocate for the trans community, and I feel that they really need God, and we are just shunning them away. And I started talking about it, and I had 4 more people join me, and we had a big vote, and they finally voted to take off all the LGBTQ mission statement out of the church. It kind of threw it out of the window. And I felt so good about it because I had my wife support me on that. So to answer to your point, and so the Christian community is the third part of it where I'm trying to work more. And of course, the corporate world is important to me because I'm from the corporate industry. And I feel that a lot of work has to be done because corporate companies are very, very good in manipulating. They want branding, a lot of branding. And if you're trans, they immediately take you and then they brand you saying that, oh, we have trans person here. Look at this person. We have a trans person. It was 2 thumbs up. And that's how they got their HRC score to be 100%. CEI index, right? Corporate Equality Index is 100% for these companies. And they don't even have gender neutral bathrooms. They don't even have policies for gender neutral people. And when trans community is still struggling. Out of the 5 floors in one of the clients' site that I'm working, they have 1 gender neutral bathroom out of 5 floors where there are almost like 20 bathrooms, which are for male and female. And I asked them, you got a corporate equality score of 100%, and why is it that you have only 1 gender neutral bathroom? And they said, oh, Celia, we are working on it. I said, how long are you working on it? It's been like 5 years. I've seen your corporate index score as 100%. And I spoke to HRC. I asked those folks saying that, you guys have an idea, how do you even score these companies? I don't see that in a right way. I started speaking out. That is one thing that gave me confidence. And even as Daniel or even as Celia, it didn't matter to me And even when I present myself as Daniel in certain companies, I was still advocating for the trans community. And when I was Celia, I was still advocating for the trans community, but with more power because this was a shame that I carried through. And I actually went to my own clients and I did a panel for them as Celia. And they Googled my LinkedIn site and they looked at Daniels, not Celia. The CIO of a company, he knew me as Daniel, he didn't know Celia. It was interesting that he wrote back to me on Celia. I sent him a friend request and he said, we were talking about you in our leadership meeting today. And I said, I hope it was good. He said, yeah, it was positive, but I want you to know that I'm really happy to hear your story. And I think I was scared to come out in my company. And I then went back to work as Daniel. I went back to work as Celia. I have gone to my client side as Celia. Didn't have problems because they knew me as Celia now. So I'm able to do that. I'm able to navigate between both genders. And it is hard, but I'm trying, and I'm trying to change companies now.
Yeah, we've seen that. You know, my company was trying to make some of those changes too, for both for LGBT, but also for the diversity in general. And you know, we were running into that same thing where the company was outwardly doing things, they were saying the right things and all of that, but there wasn't the follow up on it. So from the inside, when you've got that where externally the company is lauded as a great place for, you know, for diversity, and inside you're not feeling that, then I feel like it further invalidates you. It hurts more when it's like, well, the outside world thinks that it's so great for us, and it's like it's not there yet. So I love that you're actually working to equalize that and actually bring those together so that it does match.
I mean, I wanted to bring one point there. You know, when I had not come out as as Celia in my workplace, I used to be in the business meetings in the happy hours, and I used to be sitting with my colleagues, and they will talk trash about trans community. And they will say, look at this, you know, I don't understand this policy, a man walking into the bathroom as a woman and saying, I'm a woman. And I was sitting quietly and listening to them those days. When in the sense that when I had not come out, and I was always afraid that people would read me and kind of think that, oh, I am probably trans or whatever. But after I started coming out boldly, and whenever, even in my friend circle, when we have a happy hour, they will always know that Daniel is, sorry, Daniel is a trans advocate. And I think that was a huge change for me. And that made a huge change. So for me, the only thing I said was I went for the rally, I went for trans can work, I went for the trans job fair, and they know everything about what a Daniel would do, but they didn't know Celia part of it. So I introduced that as well. But I think it's important for us to speak out when someone throws our community down, when they talk trash about us, when we still have not come out, when we're still living in the closet. We can come out. We can at least stand up for people like us. And that is a big change. And that is a start for us to do.
Yeah, it's very important. It's so hard because you're sitting in those groups, and the herd mentality or whatever, just the way that a group works, where someone throws out something like that's kind of hateful. Maybe they don't even mean it to be hateful, but it's a complete lack of understanding and caring for that type of person, whatever slice of life that they're bagging on at the time. And it's so easy for the rest of the herd to just go along with that and to clump on to belong, but also because they have the same fears and lack of understanding of those types of people. So that's one of the things that I found in coming out and living fully as myself that helped give me that confidence is, you know, just me being out and presenting confidently as myself is showing people that a lot of what they think is wrong. And I find a lot of importance in that.
Of course.
Let's see. I think that we covered that. I think we're kind of wrapping down to the end here. What are some things that you like to share with young and closeted trans people to help them on their path?
I would like to say two things. One is what I found out in my journey is we all have our own journeys. We don't, my journey is not yours. My journey is not Emily's. Emily's journey is not mine. So we all have our own journey, and we need to find out what our journey is. So the way I illustrate that is when you take a train from New York to LA, not everybody goes to LA. Sometimes you might get down in Denver. Sometimes you might get down in some other station because that is your home. Your home is not LA. So many times the trans community always tells you that when you get into the train in New York, you always come down and get down in New York, in LA. But that's not the case. Just choose what is important for you, and that's your journey. And no matter what it is, even if you're 50% out, you're 10% out, you're not even out, you're still living in the closet, it doesn't matter. But it's your journey. Respect that little bit of what you do and enjoy that femininity. So one thing that I always say is that gender identity is in your head, and it's not the physical appearance, it's not the surgical transformation that gives you a gender identity. Gender identity is deep within your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find that true happiness, it makes you feel really good about yourself. And that is what I always tell people. Don't go around searching for validation from other people. You validate yourself. You be in the car, you be in the driver's seat, you take the lead, and that'll help you. Because we are living in times which are so hard, so many policies. I'm glad that Supreme Court had ruled out the transgender discrimination for healthcare patients. So we are living in hard times. I don't know what else will be going to Supreme Court and how many of them will be voting. It was a 6 versus 3. I don't know how it's going to be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have a future, and I believe that I have been through difficult times. For 47 years, I've struggled in my life. And I finally know that, I've gone through ups and downs, both in India and here. And I've seen even India change. And now when I went back to India, people are so happy to see me. Though I have some discrimination here and there, the world is changing. People are getting educated.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have hope. We cannot lose hope. And just be yourself, just be joyful, enjoy your femininity to the maximum, whatever it is, whatever form. And I remember one time when my daughter was pregnant and my wife was at home, my in laws were all there. I could not dress up at home. I remember wearing a skirt in my car over my trousers. And I was driving home and I was just going around the street in circles because I enjoyed that femininity. I remember those times and I think about it and I thought that little 5 minutes gave me so much joy. That's how it is. Enjoy, be joyful, enjoy your femininity, and we have hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think adding on to that, I think it's really important. It's hard to find a lot of that confidence and to allow that joy sometimes because, again, you feel you have all these negative things, but really lean into that and allow yourself to enjoy that and seek out stories, as many stories of other trans people as you can, because I find that the more stories I listen to, the more it mirrors what I go through, the more confidence I get because I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. There are so many other people that go through similar things. And so I would just say that, yeah, listen to as many stories as you can. Go and find as many people as you can and just hear what they have to say about their journey. And, if you're not at a point where you can come out yet, or you're confident, or like I said, those little moments of joy, if they cause you so much despair because you feel so bad about them, then just keep educating yourself about what other people are going through and what their stories are. That's why I wanted to do this show. Is I just feel like every story has something in it that either is something new or reverberates something that I've felt and helps me feel better about myself.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? I'll kind of open the floor to you. I think you had some other points you wanted to bring up. I leave the floor to you, and I'll.
So I was just doing some activism on Black Lives Matters and also especially with the trans Black Lives Matters. So I'm educating myself a lot on that space and trying to help the trans community, especially with Pride season and then Black Lives Matter. It's all at the same time. And as much as we care about, Black Lives Matter, it's very important right now. I was also talking about some of the trans folks who are being killed and, the discrimination that is happening. So I've been trying to educate some of the allies and different groups on LinkedIn about what's going on in the trans community. The interesting thing is, I see a lot of companies talk about D&I, and there are champions, and there are a lot of cisgender people who are telling our stories. They want you to be there, and they want to tell our stories. And I find that so hurtful because our stories are ours, and nobody can take that away. They can give us a platform to tell our stories, but I find that a lot of them are TED speakers because they talk about Black Lives Matters, and some of them are white, some of them are Latinos, anybody, whatever. Some of them are brown people also. They're talking about. I've seen a lot of women talk about trans community, and I'm like, okay, I hear you, but when I start talking to them, sometimes the pronouns they use. I was talking to one big advocate today who's a cisgender man, and he was using the word transgendered, and I kept telling him it's not transgendered, and and he kept on telling man, if a man becomes a woman, a man becomes a woman, and I was thinking, you have a nonprofit on your own, and you're not able to even understand what is going through because you're not telling our story correctly. You're not representing me correctly. And I got into a call and I educated him today. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to tell our story. Even if you feel like you want to share a little bit of your experience. The first time going out, I went out first time. I had so much joy. I had so much fun. I put on makeup. I enjoyed. Those stories are amazing, because a lot of people today, they remember me for the past 25 years, and some of them were little kids when they saw me, and they used to tell me, this is in India. They tell me that, Celia, we always admired your way in which you wrote your stories because you shared about, coming out and dancing in a skirt. We really loved your blogs, reading about it. And I think it's important for us, everybody today, even if we are advocates, most of us in the call, we have been through that. We have been there, we have done that. But we have to educate our colleagues, our peers, our friends who are struggling. And when we do that, I think that gives us so much, it helps us. It kind of heals us also. And also, most important thing, self-care is really important. I'm not saying don't self-care. For me, self-care is like super important. I go to the beach and sit down for hours together and just meditate or, look at the ocean and just sit there because I love it. I don't want to do anything. So self-care is really important. So please take care of your health. It's so, so important. If you cannot take care of your health, and you cannot help people, it's so hard. So take care of yourself. And we all are in the same fight, the same battle. So, and also focus on intersectional identities. When we are trans, we can help someone who's homeless trans. When we are trans, we can help someone who is, fighting for healthcare. But today, I remember I was actually talking to a group of therapists here in Kalinga Valley, and I was talking about gender dysphoria, and I was writing something about that, and I told them my story. Very simple. I said I had gender dysphoria. My wife understands, and so I hope you can understand gender dysphoria. And I sent them a little video, and I that's what I do. Simple things and simple ways to help community to help us. So yeah, I mean, anything we can do to empower ourselves, our community, we need to keep on doing it, and I love doing it.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I love it. On that note, are there other things that you'd like to promote? I have your Twitter and Instagram down at the bottom at Celia Sandhya Daniels, on both Twitter and Instagram. But what other things would you like to promote?
I want to promote only one thing, and that is the organization called Sahodri Foundation. I can put that in my blog, or you can send it out later. Okay. So this is the trans organization that I work with India, and there's another huge trans advocate in India. Her name is Dr. Kalki Subramaniam. So when I said I would work with trans organizations in India, I work through this organization. It's called Sahodri. Sahodri means sisters. So Sahodri Foundation, it's a big organization. It's a very small organization, but they help in a big way. They're making changes in government policies. They're also building allies. They do a lot of activism through art, and how do you help community through art. So that is one organization that I work with. So visit their websites. I can give you that. It's sahodrifoundation.org,
Can you spell
and they
that
do a
for
lot of
us?
work.
Can you
Yeah,
spell that
it's
for us?
Sahodri.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, SADORAI, Sahodri Foundation dot org.
All right, let me find
It's
that real quick.
it's an amazing organization. They do a lot of work. They've actually went and painted the transgender community in India. They went and painted a school, a rural school, and the children started coming to the school because the entire community felt like, you are all trans people. Why are you doing this? And they said, no, we want to help your children to come to school because its education is important. It's amazing how trans community can actually go and change the life of another community. Something beautiful stories they have done, and I really, really love this organization. And I
Awesome.
was the international ambassador for 2 years, and I'm still volunteering and supporting them today.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I was able to find it, and they have the simpler URL, just
Oh,
sahodari.org. Yeah. So I put that in the
yeah,
chat for
thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Awesome. Well, Celia, thank you so much for coming on and being willing to do this, first off, and then also being willing and flexible to fill in today. I'm so glad we had a guest, period. But I also think it was a great show. I've got some great feedback in the chat already. Everybody loved watching you, so thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. And
Thank you so much. Thank you to all my viewers, and I love you all so much, and thank you so much for listening to my story.
Thank you. Everybody, have a great night, and thank you for coming and watching. We'll see you next week, same time, 7 o'clock. The Transgender Show. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.